of the adult mixed children, to hear their experiences, because now that we have mixed children, we want to know how we should teach them and what things is right for them to learn and stuff, so we're doing a lot of things, as they're only toddlers, so we're just trying to infuse both of our cultures so that they know how important it is to embrace both sides of their cultures.
No, that's great. And so that's why a lot of our children, well, all of our children, I call them children, but they're full grown adults, but they're older kids, right? 22 and up. So now hopefully they'll be able to give you guys some guidance and just a perspective, right? As a mixed child growing up now that they're adults. So that brings us to our kids. But we're going to go first to someone that if you're in Toronto, Azalea. Azalea Hart, digital host for BlogTO. YouTuber, and I think your passion is lifestyle entertainment. You're a foodie. I've seen you eating enough food on your digital channels, and so you've got a passion for that. But you are joining us today. We thank you so much for your perspective tonight, Azalea. Tell us again why you wanted to be a part of this.
I thought it was important to be a part of this, mainly because I didn't really feel the differences between being Dogla until I was much older. I'm 31 now, and it wasn't until I want to say in the last, maybe 15 years or so that I really felt the effects. It was like I wasn't Black enough and I wasn't Indian enough for some people, or like when I'm around my Indian friends at the time, they would make, kind of racist comments, and, like we might go to a party and they'd be like, oh, this is a Black people party. And I would be like, no, what do you mean by that? It's just kind of weird. I'm no longer friends with those people anyways, like just mental growth. But it was just the fact, it was like things like that, and, that they're comfortable kind of with that borderline racism around me. And then, but still, even though my Black friends don't say anything, towards racism towards my Indian side, it's just that, I'm still not Black to my Black friends, but I'm not Indian to my Indian friends. So, it's been a back and forth thing growing up in the last 15 years. But when I was younger, I just, didn't really feel any effects of it. It was just, everybody kind of was just, I grew up in Brampton, and everyone was so mixed up anyways that it was just normal to be the way that we were. But, I want to say that in the last little while is more of a struggle, identity struggle.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we're going to delve deep into that, right? It's two different racial spaces in a similar culture. And then how do you navigate what's happening out with this big change, this global change that's happening in the world right now, right? Okay, we're going to go to brother and sister because we do want to introduce our last two, Tahrell Miller and Rhyena. I'm saying it wrong. Rhyena. Why didn't you just write a Rhyena then? No, I'm just kidding. Listen, Tahrell and Rhyena, brother and sister, they live in Markham, which is a suburb north of Toronto. Tahrell, used to play hockey competitively. You teach kids. You're now a digital marketing specialist. So tell us about your want to be on the panel tonight and have your voice heard.
Right. So let me just make sure. Okay, I'm not muted. I thought I was going to be there. So the big reason why I wanted to be a part of this was because there's a variety of reasons. The biggest one being that with everything going on in the world, with the untimely death of George Floyd, I feel that the only way that things can heal and things can get better is by having these conversations. And growing up in Markham, a predominantly white neighborhood, a lot of my friends have shown amazing support. A lot of them are here right now watching, and I want to use my voice, and coming as a mixed person, being able to explain the struggles and the challenges and kind of fostering and bringing different communities of people together, and providing that perspective that people may not be aware goes on. And again, growing up playing hockey and teaching hockey, I was often one of the only people of color in a lot of environments on a day-to-day basis, and had my share of struggles from that. And I want to also be a voice there and, inspire people to go out and, be comfortable with who they are and be comfortable being in situations where they're the only person of color, and really owning who you are and being able to express that and be the best person that you can be.
So we'll go over to your sister, Rhyena. How about you tell us a bit about yourself and your reasons for wanting your voice to be heard?
I'm Rhyena, I'm 22. I just graduated from York this past month. Just got my diploma in the mail. I want to really be on this panel because growing up as a mixed girl in Lake Charleston in a predominantly white neighborhood, being a Black girl or a girl of mixed race, I didn't see a lot of people like myself. My identity, I was very confused. At that point, when we moved here, I also started doing my own hair. My mom, who is Indian, she has Indian Guyanese, has pretty much straight hair. At some point, she was just like, I can't do this anymore. So I had a lot of struggle with that. And it wasn't until recently, or when I came to York in 2015, where I really felt like I was really immersed into my culture. I really got to meet people of the same ethnicities as me, both Jamaican and Guyanese. And now I'm feeling like I'm slowly getting more into it. I played carpet. I did mass last year for the first time. Incredible. So yeah, like I always want to be inspiration for other little girls of mixed race or even just of color with curly hair and stuff, because if I had that person when I was younger, it would have been a lot different. So yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate to that part about not really hanging out with or meeting a whole bunch of people that were like you. Even though I grew up in Scarborough, which a lot of people think, oh, Scarborough, mixed, huge Caribbean population. Yes, but not in 1974. I'm that old. And I'm telling you, it really wasn't until I got into high school and specifically university that I started meeting people like me and really embracing the culture a little bit more. But anyway, that was a whole other discussion that came up in part one. We're going to talk about sort of 3 different issues here: challenges faced by our mixed race panelists. And again, living in these 2 very specific racial spaces, but the culture is identical. We're going to talk about the movement, the global movement, Black Lives Matter, the images against violence on Black bodies that we are seeing in the media. How do you discuss this with your children? What support systems are out there? What's missing? What can we do to create more resources and supports for our children and for the parents as well? So all of that is what we're going to delve into. So first, we're going to go to Azalea. Azalea, you mentioned briefly about some of the challenges, but delve deeper into some of your personal experiences, maybe with your family, or maybe because you are in media, some of the challenges that have come your way from being in the work position that you're in.
Okay, so I'm Trinidadian. Both parents are, my mom's Indian, my dad's Black. And you know, like I said, I really didn't realize that there was even racism within my family until maybe around that same age, 15, when I went to Trinidad. And I mean, I go to Trinidad often, but I don't spend that much time with my mom's family. And then so one time I did go spend time with her sister, and she said to me, you know, started telling me stories about when my mom and dad met, and which I thought, you know, was going to be cute stories. But then she went into saying how, you know, that my grandpa wasn't, he didn't like the relationship. He didn't want it to happen. And my grandpa already died at this point. So it just kind of like shattered the idea that I had, or a memory that I had of him in my mind. Now, because now I'm thinking like, you're racist towards my dad, you know, or you didn't want my mom to be with my dad. So these were like things. So, you know, and I kind of just completely separated myself from my mom's family for, you know, issues like that, and just like small comments that they would make that just weren't right. Because I felt like I was growing up Black, because my dad raised us, and you know, and I just, a lot of the Indian family they were very open with, you know, saying kind of racist things. So I wasn't about that. And sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I was getting really heated of thinking about my grandpa. But I think that for me right now, when I'm focusing on certain things in the media, I'm portraying myself as a Black woman. Although, you know, I don't know how people see me. Some days people think I'm Black, some people think I'm Indian. I do straighten my hair, and I do have hair extensions in, so I look more Indian. But when I'm portraying myself in any other aspect, I'm saying I'm a Black woman. And I do sometimes explain it a little bit further and say I'm Trinidadian. And it's like, it's a beautiful thing when you're from Trinidad, because Trinidad has so many you know, diversities and so many mixed cultures into one. So it's a beautiful thing to explain it that way. But because we are right now in this time where we have to be allies and really step forward and, you know, say the words Black Lives Matter. I am a Black woman and I don't like what's going on. I mean, it's a different, it takes a lot of courage to step forward and say it, especially when people don't see you as Black anyway. So.
Yeah, absolutely. If you desire to tell people and explain your mix, right, your Indo-Afro-Caribbean mix, you find it obviously a bit different when you're explaining it to, say, your white colleagues versus other people of color. Do you find that maybe with your white colleagues, you're just going to say, I'm Black, because it's very exhausting trying to explain everything? Or like, how do you navigate that and decide how you're going to go through and explain who you are?
I think my white colleagues, I feel like they're very open. And I think that has to do with that we're all from Toronto. So they're very open with the fact that I would be mixed. I just feel like the disconnect really comes when I'm claiming to be Black to Black people. And then they're like, yeah, but your hair is so soft. And I was just like, well, I don't know. When I grew up, I was a Black girl. Like, I don't know what you want me to say. I straightened my hair. So it's just very disheartening, I guess you could say, when you are kind of stuck in this in-between, don't know how to identify yourself. But I'm still very comfortable saying that I'm a Black woman, so.
Absolutely. So this word that we all use, I'm going to go to Amala. This word that we all use, dogla, we throw it around, right? And it's common, mixed Indo-Afro-Caribbean. It's a common word. We say it just like we say roti, you know? But tell us about the history, because it actually has quite derogatory background and meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an Indo-Caribbean word. So it does originate from North India. And we learned about this, actually, we talked about this a little bit in our last panel, and I'd never heard this before, that the word actually comes from a North Indian word meaning illegitimate child, right? So it was considered that this partnership is not really a permanent partnership, and therefore it's a more derogatory words, but I'm conscious of the fact that we have some little babies with us, so I'm not going to use that word. But it has historically been used in a derogatory way, right? And so it developed from this idea of the one drop rule, or the idea of a pollution of racial purity, right? That if you were Douglas, that's actually, it was a bad thing because of the caste hierarchy, or the caste system, that again originated in India, and actually was present before British colonial rule. But throughout the colonization process, it was embedded in a far more strict way, where people could not move through castes the way that they could prior to British colonial rule. So now the definition is definitely shifting, for sure. And a lot of people, like Natasha said, we kind of either we throw the term around, or a lot of people will self-identify as a way of capturing both aspects, right? Both the Afro and Indo-Caribbean heritage. So it is a word that is definitely shifting. And there was actually a calypso artist who used the name Dougla, and has a really popular song about in Trinidad, when they were talking about sending people back to where they came from, again during independence, and talked about, well, where are you going to send me? Are you going to cut me into and send half of me to India and half of me to Africa? It doesn't really work that way. So it's an interesting term, but I agree with the sort of how people self-identify. So if someone considers themselves Dougla and is using that word, then by all means, but yeah, it does have some pretty nefarious origins.
Right. So Tahrell, so how do you identify, and what are some of the challenges that you faced, or comments that you've heard, whether it came from your sports colleagues or it came from your family growing up?
Right. So as I mentioned earlier, I grew up playing hockey very at a competitive level, and growing up in Markham, a predominantly white neighborhood, I spent a lot of time in being one of the few people of color and being mixed, it, especially at that age, we're so impressionable. And a lot of my friends, classmates, colleagues, they would just see me as just Black. And being at that age and I didn't have a full understanding of who I really was. And so I kind of went along with it, and people would just say, oh, you're Black. And then to a certain extent, to me, for a long time, I just identified as that. I looked and I was like, okay, I'm Black. But I knew deep down, like, my dad is from Jamaica, my mom is from Guyana. There's way more to me than that. And honestly, it wasn't until a few years ago, as I got into my early 20s, where I really started to understand who I was and, where my family came from and what my culture and heritage really is. But playing hockey definitely had my share of challenges growing up, because we would go, I played in Toronto, which is a pretty diverse area, but a lot of times I'd go out and play in different areas like Sudbury or Kingston or these smaller towns. And in hockey, there's a lot of trash talking. It's a big part of it. And for myself, that's something that I was really good at. My sister, I'm sure, can attest to that. I'm sure my mom, she realized from a young age that I knew a lot of choice words that she probably didn't know that I knew. But a lot of times what would happen is be in heated arguments in a game or something, and somebody would throw something out. Like, I had the N-word thrown at me a few times. A lot of times people would say, oh, go play basketball or something. And at that age, I remember that used to get me really worked up. And those kind of things, like, that's all you needed to say to me and I would be ready to fight, or I'd be super aggressive about it. And honestly, as it happened, it helped me understand, like, the meaning of, like, the N-word and things like that, and being realizing that, in these situations, I'm different from other people there. And so it, I will say, like, there were a lot of fond memories growing up playing hockey, and through all those experiences, they really helped build who I am. And I think I wouldn't have come to this realization of understanding who I am and what my background is if I didn't have those experiences. And especially, like, now when I work in digital marketing, and a lot of those situations, a lot of places where I've worked at, I've been the only person of color. So it's kind of, as I grow and as I've gotten older and become more familiar with those situations, understanding who I am and taking that time to reflect and realize I have these different backgrounds, and starting to spend more time with people from similar backgrounds and being more comfortable, it really helped me get to the point of understanding that I'm not just Black. I'm Black, but I'm also Indo-Caribbean. There's a whole other side of me. So, and that's why as a hockey instructor now, it's what really inspires me, is because there are so many more children, people of color that I get to teach and I'm seeing in the sport. And I try to be that inspiration for them and help them see that, and especially, like, I used to do hockey camps, and I would try and mentor and, try and make those children comfortable, especially the children of color, because I did see times where things would happen and I could tell without really knowing what was going on that they felt isolated, and, trying to include them and talk to them and, explain my background and that I was in similar situations, and really helping them understand and be comfortable with who they are.
Right. So Rhyena, you're his sister. How did you navigate these two different racial sides of you growing up?
Very similar thing from Tahrell, as well as Azalea. I actually related a lot to you as you're talking. I'm like nodding a lot because I really related. I play sports as well, but I didn't go as high competitively as hockey. I switched to basketball, but again, living in Markham, being, from grade 5 up until grade 8, there were maybe 3 girls of color with me, and we stuck together, and yeah, it felt very different. And like Tahrell said, like, we just identified as Black, just as Black, same as high school, just as Black. Like I said before, my hair was a big thing. I didn't know how to take care of my hair. I was getting made fun of my hair. I ended up getting texturizer to loosen my curls. My hair was burnt, terrible. It was done. My cousin, who's a hairdresser, had to cut it all off. And it wasn't near the end of high school where I was like, let me try and figure this out. So transitioning into York University, like I said, it was like honestly a culture shock. Even though, I grew up in a cultural environment anyways, but being with people and even York University being such a diverse place with their different ways of bringing cultures together, they have a United Caribbean Association that I was kind of involved with. So that really brought me into a world of things in my culture I didn't know about. I don't know, I'm losing my train of thought. I have so many things like going in my mind. But yeah, once I'm still working on figuring out my identity, and that's not to say that we weren't brought up in cultural things in our families. On my mom's side, we go to weddings. I have some saris in my closet. I understood the ceremonies and everything. You know, our grandparents would play Hindi music, and in the summers when we come up to their house and everything, it was there. But because we were living here in Markham, and most of the days we didn't really understand it, we weren't exposed to a lot, it was a little difficult. But yeah.
Right, absolutely. What I hear from all of you as you start talking, there's so much, and a lot of raw emotion starts coming up, right? Which is why it's not that you're losing your train of thought, it's that it starts triggering other things for you to say, and you're like, oh yeah, and what about this? And what about this? Like, it's a lot, and it's a lot to unpack, which we're going to go to Amala in a moment to unpack. But we want to hear from some of the parents. I mean, Rich and Jazzy, your kids are super young right now, but after hearing from our 3 kids, I know I'm going to call you guys kids, okay? This is just what I'm calling you, even though you're like full grown adults. But after hearing from our kids, how does this sort of make you think about ways to maybe raise your children, or things that you're doing now that you may need to change? You know, what do you anticipate as some of the challenges that they're going to face as they get older?
So I feel like they definitely, it's kind of like they confirm what we fear, in a sense, because we, like the area we moved to, we talk about it all the time that, you know, right now they're young and they haven't started school yet, but our biggest concern is them going to school. And because of there not being a big Caribbean population in this area, you have a lot of white, you're either white, black, or Indian in this area. So we really worry about them going to school and running into that, not being black enough, not being Indian enough, and then how do they feel confident in who and what they are?
Right, and it's sad. It makes me sad because I feel like they're going to have to choose a side, and I don't want my kids to have to choose a side because they're beautifully blended. You know, I don't want. And I already get, like, let's say we're in a store and Richard is on one side with the girls, and then I come walk up to them. I already get the stares, like, that's their mom? Like, or if I'm with my girls by myself, I get black people that approach me and say, oh, what's your daughter's mixed with? You know, it's an automatic thing, you know, and like, I just want my girls to embrace being black women. I want them to embrace being Indian women. I really don't want them to have to choose a side. And to hear Azalea's and Tahrell's and Rhyana's experiences growing up, I really feel sad for them, you know, that they had to go through feeling isolated because they didn't have someone like them in school and stuff. And, you know, race is a huge part of growing up. And, you know, Richard and I never had to experience that because Richard is fully Indian, I'm fully black, you know, and we didn't have to feel like we had to choose a side. So, you know,
it's hard to teach what you don't what you didn't experience.
Right, you know? And to hear everyone's experiences is really eye-opening for us. Like, we're sitting here like, wow, you know?
So maybe you need to get together with Chris because you're both in Atlanta and you both have mixed children, so now your kids can be friends, right? Right? Okay, but absolutely, yes. And Chris, how old is your child? And how
my child is
what you're hearing.
My child is 5 years old. He'll be 6 this year. I mean, it's definitely relatable. For instance, at school, he has the long hair. His hair came down to his waist by the age of 3, and they were complaining about his hair. He looked like a girl. He looked like a girl. Who are you? What's his hair curly? A whole bunch of negative stuff, and not just from the kids, which is expected to a degree, but this is coming from teachers. It's a distraction, and I'm telling him, like, that's your culture, period. Whether black, Indian, the Spanish culture, because he's considered a dobla. Well, my girlfriend is a dobla. So I heard that expression before, but yes, it's a lot of, the hate is real, but I experienced it a lot just growing up. I understand. I've always been open. Mixed couples don't affect me, but it's more so the people that don't look like us that take offense to what we do. So it was like a shocker going to Trinidad. And I think Azalea, that she mentioned about her parents, it was the same thing with my girlfriend's parents, which her mother is Indian and her father is Black. And I thought it was cool. I was, hey, that's, you know, it was a culture shock to go there and experience the colorism that's there. But they told me about stories of them growing up and being with that Black man, you know, that N-word. And I'm like, wow, really? I mean, y'all all look alike. Y'all dark skin, y'all all Black, you know, y'all all Black to me. You know, you don't look like the oppressor, so I don't even feel why y'all will go against each other. Y'all look alike, you know. I love y'all swag in Trinidad. I mean, it's beautiful, you know. So I didn't quite understand it until I actually got in it, but it's there. But I mean, the way I was raised, it's not a shock to me how I'm gonna have to raise my child, and you know how will have to tell him how to address the police. And hopefully it's a change with all this going on, but I done been there and done it. You know, it's just, you know, what my parents taught me, more so my dad that was in the streets, you know, he told me how to conduct myself. So more so in America, I speak English, but it's a different type of English that we have to speak, whether it's the proper, the improper English. But I got myself out of sticky situation that I probably would have died if I didn't know how to be bilingual, just body language and verbally, that I survived, you know. And to me, it may be a culture shock to some of you. To me, it's everyday living. It's not a struggle to me. All this, it's survival. It's survival mode, just being Black in America every day. And if you don't know how to be bilingual, you're gonna lose pretty much. And I've seen it a lot with friends and family members. So It's a part of life. It's every day for me. Mm-hmm.
So that's something that Chris is passing down to his child. So Ashley, when you hear that some of the parents, you know, you can teach your child what you know, but we don't know how to be mixed as parents, right? Like I don't know how to teach my child how to be mixed. I know how to teach them how to be Indo-Trini, hoping that their father will, you know, because we don't really speak anymore, but I'm hoping that he's teaching them that Afro-Caribbean side of their heritage in a way that I can't. So how do you relate to that with your son? He's 2 years old, right?
Yeah, he's 2, and it's really interesting to hear everyone's stories, and I'm glad everybody's just like being so open, because I was like so ready to be like, well, you know, and I had all my like answers thought out, but honestly, like I'm just throwing it out the window right now. But I think like for me, just looking back at my own experience, like when I was growing up, I think that my parents didn't really grow up Indo-Caribbean, or maybe they did inside their homes, but when they came out of their homes, they didn't. Like they were very absorbed into Afro-Caribbean culture. So when I grew up, I didn't hear a lot of like chutney music at home. I didn't eat a lot of curry when I was growing up. I didn't do all these Indo-Caribbean things. And I think like when I had gotten to high school, that's when I was really like, you know what, I really want to try out this Indo-Caribbean thing, because I relate way more to like the Afro-Caribbean girls, but I couldn't fit in with them because I didn't look like them. So there was still this disconnect that I was missing. So when I got to high school, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try to fit in with these Indo-Caribbean girls. And again, similar to Azalea, I actually like really don't speak to them anymore because we didn't really connect in certain ways, in the ways that I connected to like my Afro-Caribbean friends. And I think that when I think about my son and I think about his experience, because right now, I mean, he's only 2, but he looks very Indo-Caribbean. Like people could probably see that he's mixed because of the hair, which is obviously a big thing I'm seeing, but they probably wouldn't like think that he's Black. For me, I don't really see it a lot in him, maybe some features, but not really. So I think that my struggle with my son is that like he is Black, like his dad is Dougla, but he's also a mix of a lot of different things. So sometimes like even when my family members are like, oh yeah, you know, like, you know, his name is Duran. They're like, oh, you know, Duran's Black, right? And I'm like, well, no, not really, because he's also Indian and he's also Portuguese and he's also this and that. So I kind of feel like myself kind of like, how can I say it? Like justifying him to not be Black in a way where it's kind of like, no, my son is actually a mix of all these different things. But my fear is that I might kind of like push him away from not embracing his Afro-Caribbean side because I don't know how to teach that to him, right? So I think that one thing that Tahrell had said that I wanted to touch on is that like when my son was little, well, he's still little, but when he was much younger, he really liked like this hockey. He really liked to like hit things around with a stick. So we had bought him a hockey stick, and I was like, my mom's like, oh, you know, like maybe he'll play hockey. And in my head, I was thinking, I'm like, no, like that's a white boy sport, right? Like at the time I was thinking that, I'm like, he can't play that. Like he's gonna get like, people are gonna make racist comments. Like what if someone tries to like beat him up, or what if someone tries to hurt him because he's not white and he's playing the sport? So I'm like, you know, let's just take this hockey stick away. Like in my mind, like I don't want him to grow up in that way. So I think that my struggle with having like a mixed son is like, I don't really know how to teach him that. And I'm just hoping that his dad, that we're able to have these conversations now where we can kind of be like, how do we approach this like mixed race, because he is mixed, and teach him all these different aspects of who he is so he doesn't have to go through these struggles. So I think it is really a struggle to kind of figure out how we identify our son right now, because we don't want to use either, right?
I don't think it should really be a struggle. I think it is, you don't have to force your family to be ignorant because everybody else is ignorant. You understand? Teach them, don't be scared to teach him whatever. He has the best of both worlds, or the best of multiple worlds. And the people that hate the most only have nothing. You understand? They have nothing to embrace. Put it out there for them. Don't lock yourself in a cage because they don't understand. That's their fault. That's their fault. And how they view you is not your fault.
Yeah, so I think it's more so it's just like a matter of like, how does he balance all these different identities? But like you're saying, he doesn't have to like subject to one.
That's the oppressor. All these identities is the oppressor. Don't oppress yourself, because we in a day age, we trying to change that right now. They need to open their minds up.
So
they
Amala,
I don't know. They hate everything that don't look like them.
Absolutely. So there's so much here about, I'm hearing about, you don't want your child to choose sides. I mean, my kids as well. My daughter looks mixed with Black. My son looks full Indian. In fact, he looks Filipino. I'm not gonna lie. So sometimes, you know, when I'm talking to him about his Black side, he knows daddy's Black, but he doesn't look Black. But I want him to relate as Black and Indo, like Afro and Indo. So, what is this doing to their mindset kind of thing, Amala, with, you know, they know that mommy is one thing and daddy is one thing and they're mixed. You know, what's going through their heads?
Yeah, I think so. We've heard from a lot of, we've heard from all of our panelists, and it's really exciting to see that different perspective from the children, the kids who have grown up with a mixed race identity, and then from the parents. And I think like Chris made ended on a number of good points there, that it is an external force that kind of pressures us to identify in certain ways. And it actually does have a very, a pretty disgusting kind of root in blood quantum. Which was used throughout colonization and the periods of enslavement to actually put people into different categories based on their racial makeup, right? And what we know about race is that it's actually, there is no, biologically speaking, at a gene level, there's no difference, right? There's actually a lot more within group diversity than there is between group diversity, meaning that if you look at people who are all Black, their genes are as diverse as people who are Black and white, or Black and brown, or Black and East Asian, South Asian, whatever the case is. So I think that's just an interesting aside. And I absolutely agree with Chris that it is kind of an external, a societal sort of expectation that you identify as something, right? And I think especially in certain contexts, and so here's where environment plays a big, big role. Your racial identity depends so much on the environment that you grew up in, right? So like Tahrell and Rhyena were saying, growing up in a more predominantly white environment, or even Rich and Jazzy were saying that, you know, where they are, it's sort of either Black or white, right? And so as long as you're not white, you're considered Black, right? And then we add in things like what Azalea was saying about, okay, well, if you identify as Black, but what you're read as, so when I say read, it's what what do people interpret your race to be based on the way you look, based on your phenotypic presentation, right? So we've heard a lot of talk about hair, texture, skin tone, facial features, things like that, right? And also we know that those things can change, they can shift, right? Like Azalea was saying, depending on the way that she wears her hair, she might be read one way or another, right? And so a lot of that impacts our sense of self, right? Our sense of who we are. What right do I have to claim this identity, right? So a lot of the folks that I've worked with who have been, and by folks I mean like children and adolescents when I've been doing clinical work and stuff like this, is questioning what right do I have to this identity, right? If I don't look a certain way, can I claim this identity, right? And I think that that's, you know, there are actually like racial identity development models, which I'm not going to bore everybody with the theory now, although I love a good theory. But there is actually an idea or a suggestion that biracial folks actually go through a very different identity development process when it comes to race than someone who is white or someone who is a person of color, but both parents are from the same racial group, right? And so that just speaks to sort of the validity of what everybody is saying, right? That as you go on, as you categorize yourself, you are also being categorized by others, right? And so a lot of what is associated with that is guilt or confusion about choosing an identity that might not be fully expressive of how you've been raised, or even things like just making a choice depending on who's around you at the time, right? And kind of, Chris spoke to that, right? The idea of code switching, that, okay, when I'm with this group of people, I'll behave this way. When I'm with this group of people, I'll behave this way. And what that does for young people is it kind of creates this confusion of, well, who's the real me? Who am I really, right? And again, what theory suggests, I won't go into too much detail, but is that there is, although it's not a linear process, meaning, okay, you hit step 1, then step 2, then step 3, and you're good, that there's a lot of movement back and forth, right? But there is this idea that at the end of this cycle, you do hit an appreciation of multiple identities and an integration of these different things all making me, and I have every right to every part of my identity.
Okay, so I do want to talk about, because Chris mentioned it and Azalea mentioned it with her grandfather, and Chris, when he went back to Trinidad, you know, you have your kids growing up, and right now you're talking about comments or them trying to relate sort of in the white man's world. But when you go back home, or you hear your Indian grandma making comments about your dad, your black dad, or saying to your child, oh, it's a good thing she got the good hair, right? Like things like that. So how do you deal with these family comments? I think Azalea, like, how did you do it? You said that you stepped back a little bit, right? You heard these comments from your grandpa or about your grandpa, and you just kind of, did you confront them? Did you say anything to your family?
No, I definitely just stepped back. But also, when I was younger, I did used to wear my hair curly, but just like Rhyena, I did the same thing, and I wanted to loosen up the curls a little bit. And I, went to the hair salon to get my hair straightened, and I did some sort of chemical relaxer because my hair isn't Afro hair. It's just, I ruined my hair completely. So, things like that is dealing with hair and dealing with, the comments from family. I think maybe subconsciously that's how I was dealing with it. And I thought like I needed to have straight hair or straighter hair than what I had. But I do want to add in also, because I feel like we're scaring Rich and Jazz a little bit, is that, at the same time, I still love, like Chris said also, the best of both worlds. And like I eat curry probably every day of the week if I could. Like these are things that I absolutely love about my culture. And like I cook like I'm Indian, but I do my hair like a mixed girl, or, it's like there are aspects of this, and I love my facial features and things like that. I don't want to scare the parents. You know what I mean? Like I don't feel like I grew up, and I don't feel traumatized. So I don't feel like your daughters are not going to be traumatized. I don't know what life is like in America. But I do want to say here that, it's such a melting pot where I grew up that, the things that I did experience, the bad parts, the good outweighs them by far. So although, yes, I did hear different comments from family members, and I did subconsciously, succumb to the pressures and do stuff to my hair, and I still wear my hair straight, over curly, but, I just think it's kind of to each their own kind of thing. And I think I was strong enough at the same time mentally to know that it's okay to be both and just not take on what they were saying to me, because I think I'm very good at compartmentalizing certain people in my life, and it was and my dad is top tier, so I feel like as soon as you want to say something negative about my dad, I can cut you off easily. It doesn't matter what you have to say, if it's even if it's race related. So these are just like things that she said in a passing comment. It wasn't even a direct comment, but I picked up on it, and I was very okay. I knew that it was a race thing.
Yeah.
I know I just went off on a zigzag there, but I don't know.
No. That's the way. That's what it is. That's why we're just discussing, right? Everyone just grab your mobby and just chill and just talk. We just lime in. Amala, what could that do to a child to hear their own family members speaking either negatively about them, or it's like little jabs sometimes, right?
Yeah. And we thank you, Azalea, for sharing that. I had mentioned in another panel, it's a lot of us Caribbean folks, we kind of think, okay, what happens in the house stays in the house. We don't talk about that kind of stuff, right? So I appreciate your honesty in that. And I think we did mention this in the very first panel when we talked about we talked to our parents, right? That there is this sort of Caribbean-ness in the way that we communicate, right? Like a very blunt, it's considered honest, right? That no one's pulling any punches, everyone's just gonna kind of say what's on their mind, not taking into account how harmful that can actually be. And absolutely, as Natasha, as you mentioned, that it is very different when it's coming from your family members, because we look to our family for security, for safety. Again, that's some more theory stuff coming at you. But we look to our family not only for that sense of this is a safe base, this is who I can turn to when I'm dealing with things that are bad out there, but from a racial identity development perspective, that's who we're getting our understanding of our race from, right? Is the people who are raising us. And now, I mean, there's a lot of interesting conversations when it comes to, for example, transracial adoption, where the race of a parent does not necessarily align with the race of the child. And what that body of research tells us is that there is a truth to that concern, that as someone who is not Black, I cannot convey to my son what it means to be Black, because I don't have that lived experience. The difference is what I expose him to, right? And so, as Azalea pointed out, if your Indo-Caribbean family is actively denigrating your Afro-Caribbean side, that's going to cause a lot of conflict, right? Both internal within yourself and external in the family, right? And we see from Azalea's example that, okay, she's done with certain people, and that is a decision that people have to take unto themselves. But I'm going to hazard a guess, and I'm going to say it was probably not an easy decision.
It was easy.
That's it. She's got her identity. Her identity, she knows who she is. Okay, Ashley, so your boy is super young, but when we start talking about, what is going on with this global movement, with Black Lives Matter, how we want to support our Black brothers and sisters and our mixed children, what do you anticipate? I mean, he's 2, he's not watching the news, but what do you anticipate having to tell him about what's going on? What are some of the challenges you think you're going to face talking about what's going on in the media?
Mm-hmm. I think that, again, like something that Amala said, it's just like what you expose him to. So I think like even like these like conversations, like these loose conversations that me and my partner might have at home about race, about culture, about identity, like as he starts to get older, we have to learn kind of like what are the conversations that we can't have in front of him anymore, because like even at 2, they pick up everything. They say everything. They say all the words and repeat all the words they're not supposed to repeat, right? So it's just kind of like being mindful of those things and what we're kind of having those, like what those conversations look like around him. But again, like also just like what we expose him to. Like I remember, like just when he was born, I had bought this book called like Woke Baby. And it had like a young little black, I see you shaking your head. Do you have that book too? Yeah. So
my son is obsessed with that book. I think I've read it 20 times today.
Yeah, literally, like we read it all the time. And I had bought that for him because I was like, okay, well, this book, like, I guess it looks like him. So I guess like still, even with that, it was like, do I even show him these books? Like, does it make sense to show him these books? Because right now he kind of doesn't even look black. Like, what if he doesn't even know? Yeah, I know. Like now I'm starting to understand more. Also, like I'm also being able to open up my eyes, like as a parent, because it's a lot of like back and forth of like understanding and, you know, what's right and what's wrong. You're always trying to make the best decision. So you're not sure, like, you know, should I even teach my child these things? Because we don't want him to go in the world and like hate everybody too and think everybody is against him. So it's just like, how do we have these conversations? But I think the things that he will face, sorry, I didn't even answer your question yet. I think some of the things that we will face is just learning how to have these conversations. So what type of education do I give myself? I think like working in a nonprofit and being around a lot of people of color, like I only work with people of color. I don't even think there's maybe like 2 white people that work in my office. And just like being exposed to those conversations and being open to like listening, as opposed to being like, well, here's my experience, here's this, here's that, because sometimes we have to listen to kind of like move forward in a way. So I think that for me, it's just a matter of like, how am I going to educate myself and how's my partner going to educate himself, so we know how to have these healthy conversations, because there's a lot of what we see on the media and it can be very unhealthy. I was actually just telling a friend that like, I think this weekend I'm just going to take a break because it's been very hard to see everything on the news.
Yeah, Rich and Jazzy, same question to you. You know, you see all this stuff happening on the news, and this is change that is happening right now. Your 2 girls are going to be that next generation to help with change. So how do you anticipate these conversations going with them as they get older? Or have you talked to them about anything so far?
No, I mean, we do have a YouTube channel. So we have, we have a platform that we speak to our audience about, you know, Black Lives Matter movement and the protests and things that's going on. And we have our girls present. So we don't know how much they're actually absorbing at 2 and 4 years old. So, but they are present when we are having these conversations on our lives, on our YouTube channel. And we try to get, you know, to make sure that people know that we're here and that we're present and we care, even though Richard is not a Black man. And I think that as, you know, girls that are going to be grown up as mixed race, they may be seen as just Black women. I think it's important for me as their Black mom to explain to them my racial injustices that I've experienced, and tell them that, you know, life is not fair for people of color, okay, especially Black people. And I want them to understand that not all cops are going to look at you as a good person. And it's sad that I have to tell them, if you ever get pulled over, keep your hands on the steering wheel. You know, you have to go through all these structures with your child so that they understand what they're going to experience growing up as a girl of color. So we try to have those discussions with our viewers and with our family, so that when they do get older, because that's mainly why we have YouTube channels, so that we have all these experiences and memories documented, so that when they get older, we've been on YouTube for 4 years, so they can go back and look at these videos. You know what I'm saying? God forbid something happened to us, they can say, oh wow, look at these memories, look at everything that we talked about that's going on now, my parents talked about, and that's their opinion on these situations. Anything you wanted to add?
No, that's pretty.
Yeah.
So Chris, your son is 5, he's in school, right? So he's kind of exposed to what some of his other classmates would say to him. I mean, it's kindergarten, but you know that everything starts from home, right? So if his classmates' parents are talking about Black Lives Matter, what are they coming to your child to say in school?
Well, this whole movement was, I want to say, after the fact. So it was never brought up for when he was in school, was the whole Black Lives Matter movement. We don't really, well, I know I don't teach him anything of that sort. I just teach him I teach him that he need to move different than those that don't look like him. He can't, I'll give you an example. You know, kids are going to be kids. They're going to be wild. They're going to be rambunctious, you know, but when it comes to him, it's always a terrible thing. Versus the person that look different than him, it's okay. Sit down, Billy, it's okay. But when it comes to Mason, it's an issue. It got to a point where they actually changed the rule in school because of him. Definitely felt that singled out. He cried many times, cried to sleep, said he didn't want to go to school because he felt he was being alienated simply because of how he looked. That was his first introduction. But as a kid, I know, you know, they tend to forget. But we just teach them that he just have to move different in life. And hopefully when he gets my age, he don't have to experience what I experienced. And I'm glad I don't have to experience what my grandparents experienced and my father and my mother experienced. So hopefully the weight is lifted for his generation that I have concern about it. But it's like the way of life. You know, I relate to what everyone is saying, but.
Absolutely. My daughter is 12 and a half. And she's on Instagram, which I monitor. Like I monitor it through my watch. My watch is because it's all her friends talking. My wrist is constantly buzzing because I monitor it. But she posts quite frequently, in fact, daily, about Black Lives Matter and movement. And I've talked to her about what her friends are talking about. They're very supportive. I said to her, you know, when she's, and again, all of her friends are white, all of them. And I said to her, keep the conversation going with your white friends, right? Like keep it going because it's not the trend. It doesn't die off after a week. Versus my son who's 10 and he doesn't look Black. None of his friends have asked him about it because they don't think he's Black. And then they think that he's a boy of color, but it doesn't relate to him. So it's very confusing because they both look at daddy and daddy's Black. And so yes, this does impact us as a family and it impacts them as children. But I'll go to Rhyena first and talk to you about, you know, how have you been navigating these conversations in the Indo-Afro-Caribbean respect?
I'm gonna be honest, at first, when all this was happening, I actually deleted Instagram for a couple of days just because there's a lot. I find myself, I'm a very emotional person. And at first, just seeing the videos of George Floyd, just right away, like I haven't watched the whole video, I had to take it away for a second. It took a while. Tahrell and my little brother Marley were actually downstairs a few days after when all the riots were starting and like CNN was reporting it. We were downstairs and Marley was asleep, but he's kind of listening, and Tahrell and I were kind of talking about it and discussing like, this is our reality, like how do we go about this? Like, of course, we are half Black and we're also half Indian. I've had conversations with my friends through just messaging and whatnot. Two of my friends specifically, one's Filipino and one's white, but those are probably the most meaningful discussions I've had because we've all had different questions and perspectives, but we all agree, obviously, of course, that this is an issue. Now, I think through this, I am speaking up as a Black person, but also as an Indo-Caribbean person, speaking up for both sides. I haven't really spoken to any family members from the Indo-Caribbean side about it, but I know that it would be a really meaningful discussion because they also are very supportive for it as well. I work with kids. I'm Hurley's camp counselor. The conversation hasn't come up yet, but some similar things have come up. They've asked about my hair. They've asked about even if I burn in the sun, because we're always in the sun. We talk about sunscreen and stuff.
Oh, we might have lost Rhyena for a moment. It might just be the Wi-Fi.
Our Wi-Fi
we'll come back
out sometimes in this house.
You're on the same Wi-Fi, right? In the same house, but you're okay. Okay, Tahrell, well, then we'll throw to you and we'll ask you the same question about, you know, navigating what you're seeing on television, being of both mixed backgrounds.
Right. So, well, similar to Rhyena, when everything started happening with George Floyd, I also went off social media for a while because while, you know, growing up through that and being half Black, like it's nothing new. at the end of the day, you know, from a young age, like you kind of are exposed to these things and you know that it's going on. But I think constantly seeing it on the news and on social media, it became very exhausting. But I decided to use my time to really connect with people in my life, whether it be Black colleagues or the Black side of my family. And I had some really meaningful conversations there. And it's just being able to kind of take a deep breath and understand that, yeah, I'm exhausted about it, but so is everybody else who's going through it. And kind of taking that moment to first and foremost take care of yourself, you know, because it's tough to see that all the time. And yeah, I may be mixed, but when it comes to stuff like that, if I get pulled over by a police officer who's going to racially profile me, or any other experience with someone who has that kind of hate in them, I'm going to be seen as Black first. You know? So every time I leave the house, that's something that, you know, it's kind of in the back of your mind at times. Like if I get pulled over or if I see a police officer, like those are the kind of things that you do have to think about. And, you know, because they don't see that as, oh, this guy might be mixed. He might not even be Black. They're going to look at me and they're going to see just Black, you know? And so really having those conversations and getting that support from, you know, my friends, my family, even people who aren't Black, you know, a lot of them reached out to me and they offered support, but they also understood that I may not be in the headspace to respond or want to talk to them and express how I'm feeling. So it's really trying to manage the conversations with the different types of people and also educating. You know, I have had some of my close white friends come reach out to me and be honest about the fact that they didn't really realize the impact of what's going on and police brutality and all those things. And they reached out to me to understand, like, A, what they could do to, you know, make a positive difference, and B, how they can learn more and understand that they will never fully understand it the way that I will or any other Black person will. But, you know, a lot of them have reached out, and I've been there to support them to understand as much as they can what it's like what I'm going through, what everyone else is going through. And so I think, again, this is nothing new, everything that's going on, but it is inspiring at the end of the day to see that it's been weeks later and people are still talking about these things and the conversations are still happening. So, and it's really inspiring to see, because we're having, I think, more conversations about these type of sensitive issues that previous generations have. And it just sets us up for the next generation to be a little bit better. To Chris's point, the next generation to be a little bit better, and things just continue to get better. But the conversations just have to keep happening.
Yeah. So Azalea is in media and I'm in media. We can't turn off Instagram, unfortunately. So Azalea, you and I know a lot of the same people, especially being in Toronto media. So, you know, have a lot of your colleagues reached out to you when this happened? And again, I'm saying when this happened, we're talking about everything kind of coming to the forefront because of the George Floyd murder, but we know this has been happening for hundreds of years, right? But how have your colleagues approached you?
Well, BLOCTO has been very vocal in their stance when it comes to Black Lives Matter, which I'm super grateful for, because I know a lot of the other media publications within our city, you know, they weren't speaking up or not speaking up enough when it comes to, you know, certain hosts or situations that were going on with their hosts responding to different tweets and things like that online, just not being a proper ally. And because I am in media, I know that I have a responsibility as a Black woman, and I know that I have the platform to use. So I, you know, took it upon myself to ask if I can do, well, I pitched the idea of doing an Instagram Live where I did speak to a few other you know, people in our community, just so we could talk about it some more, talk about Black Lives Matter, talk about supporting Black businesses and things like that. And what I'm so grateful about for BLOCTO is that it didn't take me, although, like, I'm trying to think right now if there is another Black person behind the scenes, but it didn't take me to say, listen, we need to focus on Black businesses right now. We need to highlight these people. Everybody in the office, they were all coming up with ideas saying, like, these are Black businesses we need to support. This is who's doing nails. These are Black barbers. These are Black restaurants. And they were open to highlighting it. So it's been great for me professionally, that, like, I don't feel that strain on me to say, you know, BLOCTO is not or, you know, having to think that my employer is not supporting the movement. So I think when it comes to being an ally, if I'm calling myself Indo-Caribbean, you know, I've been posting and educating, just like Tahrell was saying, you know, and you don't stop. You have to keep the conversation going, and we have a responsibility to do that, even if, you know, the people who need to be educated aren't even tuning in to what we need to educate them on. But the fact is that we're keeping the conversation going, and I think that's important, and we're doing our part.
So Amala, there's a lot of trauma that our mixed kids are going to face. More so, I mean, I feel the trauma there. It's my kids that are mixed, my ex, my current partner is African-American. So I feel a necessity, like Azalea, to use my platform to have this voice, because I feel like they're the future and we need to help make this change. But what do you do, and how do I talk to my kids when, you know, some people won't ask my son about it at all because, well, you don't look Black, so this might not affect you. But to my daughter, they'll ask her, they'll say like, oh, you know, what's going on? Do you want to talk about it? But no one's talking to my son. I mean, we are, right. Our family is, my mom is, which is great. But when they're not getting that support, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What does that do to them?
Well, I think we've started, and we've been hearing from everyone about this topic, that it actually, the way that you're read really, really impacts your experience with race, right? So there's this joke, and it's obviously not really a joke, but I saw it recently, and it said, if you want to know whether or not you're Black, or you can consider yourself Black, ask a police officer. And it was really shocking for me, because as someone who, my partner is African American, and I know about his experiences with police in the States and stuff like that, knowing that before we had my son, we had that conversation, we had that thought about, you know, well, we hope that he gets this or that physical quality or characteristic, because it will make his life that much easier if he's not read a certain way, right? And that is the very disgusting reality that we have to contend with, right? That none of us didn't create this world that we're in, but here we are, and we have to deal with it, and our kids have to deal with it. And so one thing that you said, Natasha, is about other people might not be having the conversation with your son because he's not read as Black, but you are. And that is huge, right? That you're not just saying, well, okay, no one's going to talk to you about this, so I don't have to either, right? And so kids learn two ways, right? There's active education or learning, active learning, and passive learning. And what passive is kids are little sponges, right? They learn from everything. They learn from your reaction when you get pulled over and they're in the car. They're learning, right? They're learning when you have a server who's of a different race and they see how you speak with them, right? So all of that is serving to teach them about race, about their place in the world, and about how they should perceive or interact with others, right? And I think Chris had mentioned it, you know, sometimes explicitly you have to have those conversations, because even as young as 5, and it's devastating to hear that. And the unfortunate thing is that Chris's son is not alone in that, right? That there are kids as young as 5, 4, 3 even, who are targeted in school, and their behavior is interpreted a different way because of their race, and they're held to different standards because of their race. So absolutely, we have to have these conversations with our kids. And sometimes, you know, we do get scared of having conversations that might be too big for them to handle, right? And so we do have to approach it with care and with, you know, acknowledging that, you know, their age is important, right? Their developmental stage, is this something they're going to understand? But passively, like Ashley was mentioning that book, Woke Baby. So funny that you mentioned that, because literally that's like Illy's current favorite is Woke Baby. But just featuring stories with characters who are Black or brown, right? There's another really great one right now, We All Belong Here, Anti-Racist Baby. Like, there's a lot of children's books that both actively and passively either talk about race, talk about colorism, shadeism, talk about hair, the importance of Black hair and of celebrating Black hair, right? And that is a really good way, because children learn what's normal through what they see in their movies, in their books, in their toys, right? So I hope that answers the question. I think I just went kind of all over the place, but a lot of important things being talked about.
No, that's good. And so that kind of leads us into where we're going now in terms of resources. So I'm plugging my friend's book, but she wrote this years and years ago. And the only reason I'm bringing this up, so she wrote this book, Unique Like Me. Okay. And the reason why she wrote this is because her children are all mix up, right? So she's from South Africa, but her husband is Indian South African, and she's mixed, black, white South African. But this book here is all about different races. It's all interracial couples, but it's black and Asian and white and black and Indian and Asian and all kind of mixed up. And the reason is because a lot of times we'll go look for books like this and it's written from a black-white perspective. Yeah, where the heck are you going to find a book, right? Where are you going to find the Indo-Afro-Caribbean mixed book for your child? Come on now. I think we have to write this book. So Jazzy and Rich, like, what are some of the things, we talk about dolls, and how it's great that we finally now have black dolls in the stores. It's still too small, that section. We finally have black dolls, but now there are no mixed dolls, right? So what are some of the challenges that you are finding in terms of lack of resources? What would you like to be out there for you? What are you craving to help you right now raise your mixed kids?
I absolutely agree. There's always black, white, and that one girl in between in the dolls. So, and she's either of Hispanic origin, and we don't know. But, it's all about I do feel like there's not enough for our girls to see themselves on TV or see themselves on the show, on the shelves. There's not enough of of that representation. Like right now, like our girls are big Disney fans, okay? So they're in a mix between Moana and Tiana. So it's like, but there is no representation for them specifically. They do have the new Indian Mira, the Mira, and she's East Indian. But do they have something on TV that represents West Indian culture? No. But what we do in our household is that we try to make sure that Richard is teaching the girls about his culture. I'm teaching my girls about our culture, even as them being young. Like during Christmas time, you play all of the soca parang music. We have traditional, traditional meals. Richard makes I can cook Caribbean food as well. So it's all about us blending, so our girls can say, you know what, even though, and because it may not happen while they're children that they see little Indo-Caribbean dolls or TV shows or something like that for their age. Yeah. So it's up to us as parents. We can't depend. I can't depend on grandparents and cousins. We can't wait for Disney. We can only depend on us. And what we're going to be teaching our kids. So yeah, we try to make sure that they learn about both of our cultures.
You mean there's no superhero that looks like Rich? Come on now. There's no Indo-Caribbean superhero out there?
Probably in Trinidad somewhere. They're out there.
Please, we would love to watch it.
Absolutely. Okay, Chris, so talk to us about that. What are some of the resources that you have or that you'd like to see? What are you doing to show your children engagement? I mean, we know already that you're teaching him, you said you're bringing him up a certain way or to move a different way, right?
Right.
Because that's how you were taught.
Yes.
And so how will you expose him to the sort of the Indo side of him?
His mother does a great deal of it. I mean, she play all the soca music, macha, all through the household. So, he love it. He embrace it. I think it's beautiful. As far as seeing people that look like him on TV, and I don't really care too much for it. It's one of them things where the representation is not going to be there right now because the community is not there, so to speak. Versus I stay like in Trinidad. If I stayed in Trinidad and I see nothing but white people on there, it'd be a thing to me. I just go with the population, really, how it is. It's black and white. If I'm in China and I'm the only black man, I wouldn't expect a lot of commercials of people that look like me, if that makes sense. But I think as the cultures start blending, you know, just push for it. Right now, right now is the perfect space to push for it, because
Right.
I mean, we're multicultural. I mean, that's America, but I wouldn't get offended, if that makes sense. I wouldn't get offended. It's just, we need to just move it, push it towards that way, to see more people that look like you. You know, we getting there. You know, we taking steps. I mean, we're still marching like it's the 60s. So, I mean, we'll get there. Just keep pushing forward and stay positive. It starts in your home, and then your community, and then we get the world, you know? So just keep it going in your household. Keep it going in your household. I mean, it's many cartoons out there. I mean, Netflix that have black people. I mean, Dora the Explorers, you know, Spanish, I believe. But it's out there. You got to look for it, unfortunately. But we have the power of the web. We have the power of the web, so we can find it. It's out there. And start supporting, like this, black owned, Indian owned, whatever, people of color owned. Start supporting it more, right? I mean, even with music, you know, they criticize maybe street music versus someone like what's the guy name? Someone like Jay-Z or Nas or something, that Public Enemy, that teach, you know, black power stuff. Start supporting them more. And the more we support people that have positive music, we see the change. You know, until then, you know, you push for the change you want. It's simple. To me, it is. Push for the change you want.
Support the message, right? Absolutely. So with Ashley, you know, how are you currently supporting your son or showing him, you know, because as the Indo side of the relationship and of their culture, you want to show them that you are supporting the black side as well. And especially with me, I don't live with that partner anymore. So I don't know what they're learning when they go there, right? I don't know. So I need to make sure that I'm showing them what I'm doing to support the Afro movement that's out there right now for equality. What are you doing?
Yeah, I think also I think we had said it before that I feel like in Toronto and in the States, it's very, very different too. Like that's one thing that I'm noticing. It's very different in Toronto because I think a lot of it has to do with cultural representation as opposed to like your skin color sometimes. But that's how I see it, especially growing up in like Scarborough and Malvern, that's what it looks like over here. And I think that for me and my partner, a lot of it is not like how we don't teach our son about color a lot. What we teach him a lot about is like cultural representation. So we'll play a lot of soca. Like he's a soca head and he's only like 2. So we teach him a lot of soca. You know, we show him like when we're watching the Trinidad radio station on our TV on YouTube, we like sit him down and he'll watch it and he'll laugh at it. I don't know what he's laughing at, but he'll laugh at it. So, you know, and like reading books to him and just exposing him to both sides of the culture. So like even my partner being more open to like listening to like chutney music and having fun with it and like, you know, teaching him about Tassa, but also teaching him about steel pan. So really like kind of immersing him in that culture. But one thing that I learned today, and I think it's one thing that I might have not been as woke about as I am now as a parent, is that I do need to have these conversations with him eventually about like, you know, he will eventually go out into the world and he's going to be like a young black boy. And it's like, you know, how does he approach certain people? How does he represent himself? How does he carry himself? Like, does he know his rights? Like, does he know how to approach certain situations? Like, all these different conversations that we do need to have. It's not all like fun and games and just teaching him the soca and teaching him chutney and reggae and all these things. It's also a lot of education to it. So really just making sure that, again, I stay woke and my partner stays woke and we have those conversations with our child.
So it's a lot about self-identity, but in different stages as they grow, obviously. So when I hear Azalea's story, I want to know, Azalea, what advice would you give young Azalea in order to sort of find yourself? Because you said that you were a little bit lost when you were younger. just based on your environment and who is around you. So what advice would you give yourself? How would you support yourself as a younger Azalea?
Well, growing up for me, when I was in elementary school, you know, I was listening to Spice Girls and Backstreet Boys, and it was minimal soca, chutney, or
Chris is laughing at you. He's dying in his box over there.
that was the time. Backstreet Boys and Spice Girls. That was it.
Wow.
I was always very Spice when it came down to it, but maybe around grade 5, I want to say, is when, because of the neighborhood I grew up in, we had different Trini households all around, and we had the older guys, like the teenagers, and they would be playing, you know, dance hall and playing soca. So that's how I kind of got into that, and then into, you know, chutney soca mixes and things like that. So it's like I only became lost when people started asking me what I am, if that makes sense. I didn't feel like I was lost, or I didn't feel different in any way until people were trying to separate me. What side are you more towards? Are you more Indian or are you more Black? And even now I can't even answer that question. I still don't know, because sometimes I do listen to chutney music. You know, I can't, you know, and I, like I said before, I cook like I'm Indian, I guess you could say. I don't know, Trinis cook everything. So I don't really know, but you know, it was that at that point in my life did I feel lost, is when I started getting older and I did start doing my hair differently, and people started asking me, what are you? That's when it was just kind of like, I don't know, what do you mean, what am I? You know, and it was just, those are kind of like self reflection questions, I guess you have to ask. But to my younger self, I don't know, I think that I'm open to so many different things, and I don't know if I would change anything, to be honest. So I don't know if I answered that question very well, but I don't think that I would change anything.
No, I think that's great. I think you are, what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that you needed to go through your own journey. Everybody has their own journey,
Right?
and you are who you are because of that. And that's why you wouldn't change anything, because you're spectacular. You are. I haven't even met you in person. We're both in media in Toronto. We've never met in real life before. I think I've seen you at different events.
We can meet.
Yes. Post-COVID, exactly. Okay, so Tahrell, same question to you. You know, knowing all of the challenges that you've faced, you've lived it. What would you tell a younger Tahrell, and how would you have supported yourself as, say, a 10 or 12 or 14-year-old Tahrell?
Right. So for me, the biggest thing that really, through my experiences, really opened my eyes to who I am with my mixed background was learning about my family's history. When I was going through school, I think I was about maybe 20. I stayed with my grandparents on the Indo side because it was closer to school. They're also watching, so hello. I feel like I have to shout them out. But staying with them, I got to really learn about the history of how they came to Canada from Guyana. And back in high school, I had to do a report in history on my family's history. And looking back, I wish I had taken that more seriously, because I did it, and I learned a lot because I did the report on my Indo side. And I remember my grandma, she sent me photos and documents, and I actually learned that they came from, like, we traced back from India to Guyana as indentured service. But back then, I had no idea what that meant, and it wasn't until maybe a year or two ago that I truly appreciated what that meant. And so looking back, I think if I had those conversations and learned about my history on both sides, which I started to learn as I got a bit older, but I think if I had pushed for those questions and had those conversations, I would have had a stronger sense of identity, for lack of a better term, a stronger sense of pride of those backgrounds. And I think it would have equipped me to be a little bit more self-sufficient when dealing and growing up in that environment as being the only person of color a lot of times. And I think if I had that background and that foundation of knowing where we came from, what that history was, then I could better hold that down and be like, you know, when people say, oh, you're just Black, I could speak more to that and stand up to it and be like, no, I'm actually this and this. So looking back to myself, I think that would be the big thing. Similar to Azalea, there's not a whole lot that I would have done differently. I think I'm very appreciative of what I have had and the experiences that I've had it made me who I am today. But I think if I had those conversations, and that's why I'm so happy to see that a lot of parents or parents on this panel probably listening to that, you know, you're getting to hear these voices. And the one thing I will say is, you know, have these conversations, talk about the history of your family, how you got to where you are now, you know, because it empowers your children, but also it keeps that story going, because then they grow up and then they have kids and they tell that story, and then the story never really dies. And that pride from where we come from, it lives on.
And so Rhyena, so same question. I mean, you guys had a very similar upbringing, obviously, being brother and sister. But, you know, anything that you would tell maybe other Afro-Indo kids who are growing up and kind of struggling with their being both brown and black, and kind of trying to navigate both spaces?
So
what would you tell them?
Being a psych student, one thing that really stuck with me was the Erickson theory. And there's one stage of identity versus confusion. And that's kind of the age I connect it with, the age of like being a preteen, because I found, you know, from grade 5 and up that I was really struggling with who I am. You know, we're getting put in these boxes of being an athlete, being a music kid, an artsy kid, and whatever. And then also race gets added into that as well. For myself, like Tahrell said, like ask questions. You know, for me specifically, being a girl, you know, physical image was a lot. As a young girl, especially with even back when I was in grade 5 and even now with the media, again, my hair, now YouTube literally saved my hair in terms of tutorials and stuff. And, you know, I wish I asked my Jamaican side more about curly hair and like, how can I take care of my hair? What can I do? Can you guys do my hair more? Can I come over every Sunday and you braid my hair? And then growing up kind of into now, same as Tahrell, when I was in second year, I was with my grandparents more on my mom's side, the Indo-Caribbean side. I was with them staying over like 2 or 3 times a week. So my grandma, I don't know if she's watching this, like Tahrell said, she's that grandma, she'll chat your ear off for almost an hour sometimes. I go to the kitchen table to eat and she'll talk to me about her trips that she do with these people, with her family members back in Guyana, all her stories and stuff. And even my dad's side, I visit my grandma a lot. And again, she'll tell me stories about her grandmother or her mother and her father and what it was like in Jamaica for them. And I actually learned a lot more about my dad's side as well. So yeah, ask questions. You know, I wish in those moments where I was curious about either side of my family to ask more, because even our aunts and uncles tell us so much about everything as well. Just ask. Like Amelia said before, kids are sponges. Our brains, kids absorb so much. So if you tell me at a young age about your history and stuff, and like Tahrell said, if someone says, oh, you're just black, it's like, actually, I'm not just black. I even say that now. I say I'm Guyanese, and then I go further and say I'm Indian Guyanese because, you know, we were brought through the slave trade to Guyana and everything. So through that's going to build so much, that would have built so much more confidence for me. And it definitely would change my life for better. But again, like Azalea and Tahrell said before, a lot of the experience have built who I am. You know, I'm Tahrell would attest to this, very strong-willed, and I will say what I say. Yeah, no, sorry. I say what I say, but that's just built on some experiences where I was bullied and I was told, speak up. You know, someone said something about me, I'm like, hey, that's not cool. I've been like that since like grade 5. So yeah, ask questions, and ask further questions and keep going and keep digging and just build from there.
Yeah. So that's the sort of the common theme here. Nadia also said in our chat section, she said, agreed, so important to understand the histories in order to fully embrace the mixed cultures and identities. But you either come from a family where they talk a lot, like the Millers, right? Or my family didn't really talk a lot. My family was very quiet, right? We would go over, you sit, you eat. I didn't hear a lot of stories, and I kind of wish that I did. And so that's great advice for me now, raising my kids, is to teach them as much as I can, sort of from the Canadian perspective anyway. But I mean, they spent a lot of time with my mom as well. They're always there. They just spent the last 2 nights there. So, you know, maybe I need to encourage her. That's my job now. My take home is to encourage her to start talking more about her history and her experience growing up in Trinidad, even with the racial tensions and stuff. As they get a little bit older, she can go a little bit more deep. So Amala, talk to me about the importance of conversations about history and foundation and all of that in the family as the kids are growing up.
Yeah, I think I think Tahrell and Rhyena addressed it beautifully, that it's open conversations is one of the most important things that as a parent that we can give our children, right? And even things like admitting that we don't know the answers or we don't have the answers. So what I heard from a lot of the parents is like Natasha, you mentioned, Ashley mentioned that, you know, and I myself, I agree with this 100%, that we're not mixed, we're not biracial. We have one experience, so we can't teach certain things to our child. But having open conversation, being a person that you know, that your child knows that they can come to with certain questions that you won't just dismiss, right? And I think that's another kind of, perhaps this is just my family, but that's kind of another Caribbean thing. It's like, why are you asking that for? Like, that's not important. Who cares? Like, go do your work. go sit at the table and finish your homework or something, right? And so just validating our children that they have every right to ask those questions, and that if we don't have the answers, that we'll find out together, right? And history is hugely important, and sometimes, you know, a lot of us don't have access to that history, depending on our family circumstance, or depending on, you know, again, the history of colonization and the slave trade, right? That one of the first things that colonizers tended to do is burn down the libraries, burn down places of knowledge, right? So a lot of us don't have access to that, right? You don't know who your ancestors were, you know, and now, or you don't know that, you know, especially for African American folks, that there's a lot of mixture there, and sometimes people don't know, right? You don't know a specific nation in Africa that you're from, right? Again, I think it was Ashley that pointed it out, that the culture in Canada, like Black identity and culture in Canada, is very different from Black identity and culture in the States, and I think here it's often very othered. So it's like, okay, if you're Canadian, you're white, and if you're Black, then you're, you know, from the Caribbean, you're from Africa, you're from somewhere else. Whereas in the States, you can be just African American, right? And nobody questions further of like, well, no, what, like, where are you really from, right? So again, that's another thing that might mean that Rich and Jazzy's girls have a very different experience, and Chris's son has a very different experience than, you know, the like Ashley's son or my son or your kids, Natasha, growing up here in Canada, right? But I think just absolutely being open to those conversations and doing some of that history, that digging together is really important. And also it builds a good parent-child bond anyway. So it's a twofer on that one.
I agree.
So
I agree.
Oh, I don't know who said they agree. Was that Chris? Yes.
Yeah, that was me. Yeah, I say I agree. I think when it comes to other countries, Black, and I use that term loosely, they can call you Black, but you have an actual culture, an actual history, versus just being Black in America. We don't know where we from. You know, that was eliminated from us. It was written out. We're just here in America. So we're just Black. We created our own culture, our own thing, not knowing where we're from. So at least at the end of the day, y'all have that y'all know where y'all from. You know, y'all know y'all people, but we're just Black. We can't say I'm Black and my grandfather is from Cuba, or my grandfather is from Europe. Y'all have that luxury. You know, our history in Black, we just here. It's like we just appeared. Like they just dropped us in America and that's it. Nothing.
Yeah. Nirosha says the great balance of Canadian and American perspectives. And I mean, that's the whole goal of this, is for us to try to, you know, just hear the different stories, right? They're all different, but they all have this similar vein running through them. So we want to also open up the chat to any questions that anyone has for any of our panelists. And while we open that up, Melanie says she experienced racism at a young age from Afro-Caribbean classmates, as she was the only Indo-Caribbean student. This segment of the chat is so beautiful. I would tell my younger self to be accepting of who I am, not care what others think. Yeah, and you know, I want to direct people also back to the Brown Girl Diaries YouTube channel, because we did talk a lot about racism, bigotry, the history of this, the racial tensions between Indo-Afro Caribbeans from time, right, and coming forward. I mean, we can't really go into all of what we went through over the last few weeks, but I will direct you back there. I don't know if anyone has any closing thoughts. I think I'll go to Azalea. I'll just go in the order of my grid. And I want to go to Azalea and again, just kind of say, as a mixed Indo-Afro-Caribbean child, I keep calling you a child, but you're representing the children and sort of the growing up experience. Any closing thoughts, and how are we going to push this forward within our families and start to make that global change?
Yeah, I think to jump on Tahrell and Rhyana's back there with the open conversations, I want to say that I don't really remember ever having any sort of open conversations in my family about being half Indian, half Black. I don't think it was even a question in my mind at the time either. And even on the topic of, you know, talking about having dolls that look like me, I didn't have that either, but I definitely understand and I see how important that is. If we're still talking about regrets though, I do want to say to Rich and Jazz, don't let your daughters ruin their hair, because I think both Rhyena and I both did that when we were younger. I mean, our parents, I'm sure, didn't know. I went when I was 16 and I was like, yeah, just put whatever chemical in there. And, you know, and I ruined my hair. So I guess that, you know, don't let them do that. But, you know, all in all, I think that conversations like this are very important, and I'm, you know, very happy to be part of it. And I'm hearing perspectives that, I didn't necessarily think of on my own. And although growing up, like my closest cousin, who's like my sister, and her mom is like my mom, and she's Indian, and it's my dad's brother who's Black, so they're Dogla as well. If we're still using the term Dogla, I don't know how I feel now. But you know, like I always grew up, and I think just because I was growing up, and all my other cousins were also Dogla on my dad's side, that, you know, I never felt that different. So that's why I feel like maybe the conversations didn't come up. But I think if you're struggling with it, have open conversations, ask questions, ask your kids how they're feeling about certain things. But like I said, I know you guys are all in America, so I just don't know what the it's so different than what we're experiencing here.
Yes, and yes, we are still using the word Dogla.
Okay.
We own it. That's our word. Tahrell, closing thoughts and on how we can just continue the conversations and push things forward.
Right. So in terms of continuing the conversation, I think it's honestly, it's that simple, really. It's just continuing to, you know, reach out to people, whether you're a person of color, and having conversations with people who aren't people of color, or having continuing conversations with other people of color. Or if you're not a person of color, you know, it's continuing to understand what you can do to support and recognize that, you know, you'll never necessarily face what people of color may be going through. And if it's for parents, it's, you know, continuing to, you know, involve yourself in communities like this, and, you know, use these as opportunities to potentially meet other parents who have children who may be mixed. And, you know, I think one of the things I was thinking of after this conversation that I also wish I had more of was more friends who were mixed like me. You know, again, growing up in where I grew up, having anyone of color was a privilege, let alone another mixed person. And it's one of those things when you meet someone and you find out that you're both mixed, it's like kind of like a special bond. The light clicks off. You're like, oh, okay, so like this is and this, you know, like have you ever experienced this? And like you can kind of open up and connect at a different level there. So I think all of those things, and just trying to, you know, do what we can to make things a little bit easier for our children, next generation, especially the next children, you know, and learning from the stuff that we've had to go through, and, you know, trying to set them up to be a little bit better, and, you know, be able to go a little bit further.
Okay, so Rich and Jazzy, after hearing from our kids, and we also have a question for you as well. I'm going to kind of mesh it all into one. So I'm going to ask you, so what have you learned here to hopefully help your kids hold on to their identity when they're at school? Because someone had someone sent us a question. I'm sorry, I have literally 4 devices in front of me, so I apologize if I'm all over the place here. But someone wrote, their son is mixed, but Indo-Afro, but looks more Black than any other culture. He is in school where there are white and East Asian kids. So what advice could you give to help him keep his identity and confidence? He knows he's different, but he doesn't understand quite yet who he is. So based on that, how are you going to help your kids keep their identity in school? And based on what you've heard here.
It all starts at home. It all starts at home, and as your children grow, they know their history. You know mom's side, know dad's side. And after doing this panel, I think that Richard and I, not to like pat ourselves on the back, but I think that we are headed in the right direction after speaking with you guys and understanding your history and your background and what made you who you are today. I think that it's important for you to instill confidence in your child because nobody else is going to do it. Okay, you have to go to school and know I am beautiful and beautifully blended. And yes, I might not look like everybody else in my class, but that's what makes me beautiful. You know, I think that it's important for your kids to embrace their hair. And if you are a parent watching this and you don't know how to do your child's curly hair and you're thinking about straightening, you know, YouTube is a friend, and look on YouTube. Look, you know, ask a friend, ask a family member, so that you can learn as well to do different styles and things. I think that Richard and I, because we've been in a relationship for so long, we've learned to embrace each other's cultures, and we had so many conversations because we knew that when we do decide to have children, that this would be the top of the problem, the things that our children go to. We talk about it all the time because they haven't started school yet, you know? And well, with this COVID, she's supposed to be starting pre-K in August, but you know, we're gonna be sending her. But you know, we've been having these conversations for years. So I think that our girls will be well prepared, knowing that they're gonna be different than their East Indian, because I know how the school is. It's going to be East Indian and white and a little sprinkle of Black. And I want them to, you know, just love them and love themselves, and us having conversations with them at home, and Richard teaching them about his history. And like Chris said, and Chris, I really, really agree with you. Us as African Americans, we don't know where in Africa. You know, at the end of the day, yes, we are all African Americans. We just so happen to get dropped off in America, but we don't know where our ancestors.
We don't know.
And you know, and it's sad because I can't tell my kids, okay, well, your great-great-grandfather is from Nigeria, your great-great-grandma is from the Congo, and let's go over to the Congo and see. You know, I don't know that history, but Richard knows that history of where. And even when we went to India together for part of our honeymoon, he knew exactly where in India his ancestors, and I thought that was so beautiful that he knew exactly where in India his great-great, was it great-great?
Yeah, it was because of digging, you know, I've for a long time always tried picking my family members' brains, you know, grandparents and stuff like that. And I think that's really important for everyone while your family's around to ask those questions and just dig, just keep digging, because a lot of people don't do that. And once they're not here anymore, that information is lost forever, you know? So we actually even do where, like I had my uncle here last year from Trinidad, and me, him, and Jasmine, and everybody, we sat around, but I wanted her to be able to hear a lot of information from my family. And I've sat with her family and really dug. I've gotten information about her family that she didn't even know. Because, you know, also if one of us is not here, the other person has to be able to carry that information on to the next generation. So I think it's really important to dig. In general,
I agree.
You know, as a parent, and every parent knows this, you're always in a state of not knowing if you're doing the right thing. In raising your kids, you're always worried, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? How am I going to do this? How are you going to prepare them? All those things. And I think the panel really really kind of confirmed that we're doing some right things. It gave us some other things that we probably should dig more. And I'm really happy, like with our YouTube, we're able to document stuff, so it's there forever. But it just makes me think now I need to go back to the generation before us and maybe pull a little bit more and document some of that too.
I'm impressed that you found out where in India your family is from, but you're so right, because once, that's just by digging in your own family?
So I stayed with my grandmother one time, and I was going through pictures, and it's going through pictures, and she had, actually my mom still does this, and I tell Jasmine that we need to do this also. And probably some of you parents do the same, where they didn't just take pictures, but they wrote on the back of the picture, like where it's from and everything else. And I mean, I guess nowadays with social media, like the iPhone, you know, there's a stamp on there where it was taken and all of that. But
to have the tangible artifact,
right,
you know, is good.
Yeah. So my grandmother had stuff written on there, and it was her grandparents and where in India they came from, and she wrote it on there. And if I didn't happen to stay at her house that night and happen to take a picture of that picture and then come home and do some research, and actually whatever I searched on there, I was not able to find. And I had to start speaking to people who are actually from India. Over the years, I would always bring it up, like when I would meet someone from India, because I never really knew if I would ever get to India. And I would just pick their brain. Hey, what about this area? Have you ever heard of it? And sometimes it's as little as what they wrote down may be the way they knew how to spell it, and things have changed over time, or they changed. You know, some cities, they've changed the name completely. But I was just lucky enough to be digging through some old stuff. And that's only on one side of the family, because to be honest, on my dad's side of the family, they spoke a little bit more about stuff, but I don't have good detailed information. And now on my dad's side, I've lost my dad and both of his parents. So it leaves me now, you know, always wishing I would have asked more and wrote stuff down, or they would have had more information. So I guess at this point, what I could do is, like someone had said, talk to your aunts and uncles. You know, they've got the information too.
You do have to ask the questions, because if you wait, then you do ancestry.ca, or what is it called in the States? Is it 123me? Oh, ancestry.com. Listen, my mom's side, they said that she is from anywhere from Afghanistan to Goa. You know how big that space is? So in other words, I have no idea. Right. No idea. So it's good to preserve those.
Generalized answer.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to leave closing thoughts with Amala, unless anyone has anything else to add. I want to thank you all, but I want to hear one last thing. Amala, what is our take home? What is our homework? What are we doing to proceed with the conversations? I know we have to conversate and we have to dig, as Rich said, but closing thoughts for us.
I think, well, thank you so much to all of our panelists, because I think there were so many very, very important points that were raised. And one thing, well, first of all, Rich and Jazzy, Rich, I just realized that the panel on your shirt matches the girls. I just caught on to that. That is so cute, so precious.
We love to match. Matching is our
I love it.
Number one thing.
I love it. It's so precious. I thought it was just the girls, but one thing that Rich just mentioned was the importance of if Jazz isn't there, or vice versa, it is still on us as the person who is not of that culture or of that heritage to still do the work of carrying that knowledge on, right? And so we all have an obligation to our children to do that work for them and with them, and to know that this is not, it's a journey, right? It's not, we're not gonna hit a point where it's like, yes, I've arrived. I know all the things, I am always secure in my identity at all points in time, right? That, you know, even for me as an adult, who grew up of, you know, one specific race, one specific religion, and everyone in my family matched that, it shifts all the time, right? Depending on the context that I'm in, if I'm in a professional space, if I'm in a personal space, if I'm in a religious space, right? It shifts all the time. And I think being able to acknowledge that we're not gonna have it all figured out all the time, and acknowledge that there is a lot of, again, like Rich said, a lot of there can be a lot of anxiety around parenting and needing to get it right. And that my husband hates this phrase, hindsight's 2020, right? We'll always look back and think, oh, I could have said this. I wish I did this. I could have done this. And just being gentle with ourselves and with our children. And I think that would be my advice both to myself as a newer parent and to all of us who are kind of in this journey together, and especially my folks who are watching who are a bit younger, who are just kind of exploring their biracial identity. Just be gentle with yourself, right? There is no right answer. Just because it's this way for Tahrell and Rhyena doesn't mean it's going to be this way for you. And that's okay. That's very, very social worky, very kind of hippy dippy.
No, that's great, Amala. Thank you so much. I'm gonna leave you with Zenobia also says yes with the photos. She has a bunch of photos like that from the grandmothers, but she can't actually make sense of the writing on the back. But I think Rich would say still dig, right? Take it and dig. And these have been amazing conversations. If you missed part 1 and 2, again, I'll direct you back to the Brown Girl Diary YouTube. And we went from everything from the history of slavery from Africa over to the islands, to indentured servants being brought over from the islands, the politics of in the islands and Guyana that led to some of these racial tensions, all the way up into what we talked about today. So all 3 panels are going to be up on the YouTube by the end of the week. I will also leave you with Rich and Jazzy's motto, which I love your motto: our life can be as rich and jazzy as you make it. So I'm gonna live by that. I think that's a very good way to live. So thank you to all of our panelists. If you have any further questions, please direct them to Brown Girl Diary, and then we'll make sure that we get it over towards Amala Baksh, our mental health specialist today. So thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the heat.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
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 Bye.